rowdy crowd. I promise you I will not be late again because you guys are out of control. Anyway, I want to welcome you to this morning's committee hearing. I'm joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Tony Cardenas. We have several items that I believe can be put on what I consider the consent calendar, but there are also a few items that we will discuss. We've just been joined by my wingman, Ed Reyes, so this committee is ready to go. We have a quorum, so let's take care of business. Madam City, Miss Barclay, if you could read items 1 and 2.
Item 1 is a report from the Community Redevelopment Agency and a joint report of the City Administrative Officer and the CLA relative to various actions for the Plaza Pacoima Retail Center project.
Okay, without objection, we will adopt the joint CAO and CLA report. That brings us to item 3.
Excuse me, item 2 had a CDD report on that same item. I apologize. Item 3.
It's okay, you're forgiven, it's early.
Item 3 is a report from the CRA and the CLA relative to conditional grant agreement with Prototype Center for Innovation in Health, Mental Health, and Social Services for the rehabilitation and expansion of a domestic violence shelter.
Okay, we'll adopt the CLA report on item 3. Mr. Cardenas has a few questions on item 4, so let's hold item 4 to the end. Let's go to item 5.
Item 5 is a report from the CRA and the CAO and a resolution relative to a loan agreement with the LTSC Community Development Corporation and Korean Resource Center for the KRC Senior Apartments Affordable Housing Project.
Okay, then without objection, we'll adopt the CAO report on item 5. Item 6.
Item 6 is a report from the CRA and a joint report from the CAO and the CLA and a resolution relative to various actions and agreements relating to the construction of a city-owned public parking facility at 1627 North Vine Street.
Okay, then we'll adopt the joint CAO-CLA report on that item. That brings us to item 7.
Item 7 is a report from the CRA, CLA, and City Attorney and ordinances relative to amending the redevelopment plans for Beacon Street, Crenshaw, East Hollywood, Beverly, Normandy, Laurel Canyon, and Monterey Hills redevelopment projects areas, extending the dates of effectiveness and the time for receipt of tax increment.
Okay, then we'll adopt the CLA report on that item. Okay, Mr. City Attorney, I want to make sure that you're not over there sleeping. What item are we on now?
Item 8, sir.
Oh, you're on it. You're on it. Let's read item 8.
Item 8 are reports from the CRA and the CAO relative to the award of contracts on an as-needed basis to pre-qualified list of 30 artists in all project areas for a 3-year term ranging from $25,000 to $750,000.
Okay,
and there's there's an amended attachment that's been provided to the city clerk.
Okay, so we will adopt the CAO report on that item. That brings us to item 9.
Item 9 is a report from the Los Angeles Housing Department and the CAO relative to Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982 resolution and minutes for the Boyle Apartments, Columbus Square Apartments, Griffin Apartments, MacArthur Park Metro Apartments, Phases A and B, and Paseo Plaza projects.
Okay, then on item 9, we'll adopt the CAO report. That brings us to item 10.
Item 10 is a CLA report relative to the status of the city's preparations for the 2010 census.
Okay, we'll receive and file the CLA report on that item. Item 11.
Item 11 is a motion, Reyes-Perry, relative to the issuance of a request for proposals for the rehabilitation and purchase of property located at 2516 East Lake Avenue.
Okay, Mr. City Clerk,
Sir, yes, sir.
what are your recommendations on this item?
Councilmember, it is a motion made by Mr. Reyes.
Oh, boy, I love this staff. I love this staff. So we will adopt the motion. That brings us to item 12.
Item 12 is a motion, Alarcon-Wesson, relative to developing a self-sufficiency index for the City of Los Angeles and related actions.
Okay, we'll adopt this motion as well. Brings us to item 13.
Item 13 is a motion, Alarcon-Reyes, relative to the creation of a legally required redevelopment survey area in Council District 7.
Okay, on item 13, we'll adopt that motion as well. That brings us to item 4. If you could read that, and I think Mr. Cardenas wants to ask a question or make a statement.
Item 4 is a report from the CRA and the CLA and a resolution relative to acquiring real property located at 2341 and 2375 West Washington Boulevard and 1849 South Gramercy Place.
Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. I have some questions about the land acquisition fund. We can get the staff, whoever can answer some questions
And
about that.
before you start asking the questions, Mr. Cardenas, we've just been joined by the president of the council. What is it? Ensign in training, Eric Garcetti. Is what is it now?
Lieutenant JG. Lieutenant JG.
Lieutenant in train, JG. Okay, Mr. Cardenas.
Thank you very much. The fiscal year 08-09 budget included $17.1 million for the land acquisition fund.
Yes.
And I noticed in the notes that this is the first approval of funds out of that fund of $2 million. I don't question the need or the use of the funds on those $2 million, but I think it's an opportunity for the rest of us to understand. Can you remind us what this land acquisition fund is earmarked for and what we would be using these funds for?
Excuse me. The land acquisition fund was established last year with the intent of sort of streamlining the acquisition property in areas of need, specifically in South Los Angeles. And that sort of has been expanded to include Council District 9 as well as 10.
I'm sorry, can you repeat what areas it's?
South LA, CD9, CD10, as well as needed beyond that as well, pursuant to review of the Land Acquisition Task Force that was created pursuant to the guidelines for the fund.
What is the makeup of the Land Acquisition Task Force?
Yeah, it consists of the offices of the CLA, CAO, the office that will be engaged with the in the location of where the acquisition property is to be located, as well as the Housing Department and CDD.
Okay.
It's
And
reviewed before the agency goes to the board for approval.
the board meaning which board?
Agency board,
Agency, which agency?
CRA.
CRA, okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that the main focus of these funds, of this land acquisition fund, are for particular areas of the city. But is it strictly limited to those areas, or can the case be made throughout different parts of the city to access these funds?
The focus was to focus in South LA, areas of CD9, CD8, CD10. There can be exceptions, however, based on availability of funds and review by the task force.
Okay, so technically and legally, it's not limited to those three districts?
No.
Okay, so it's just a matter of the case being made and then whether or not the need is appropriate, and then those funds can be accessed in from other parts of the city of Los Angeles.
Correct. The priority was given, pursuant to the fund, priority was given to South LA and areas of CD9, CD10.
And the objective of these funds is to create what atmosphere or what result?
To acquire property, sort of a streamlined process of to acquire property that becomes available quickly, and the agency can act and acquire this property using these funds for development purposes.
Okay, for development purposes. Now, development purposes meaning commercial, industrial, residential?
Residential mixed use for those uses.
Okay, so primarily it's residential mixed use is the objective.
What we've seen is primarily residential / mixed use as well.
Okay, so this is a fund that seems to be put together for the purposes of land acquisition, but specifically for the intended use of that land for residential?
Correct, and as well commercial.
I'm sorry, what?
And commercial too.
And commercial. All right, no more questions.
Okay, Mr. Cardenas, we've just been joined by Councilmember Perry. So on item 4, we will adopt the CLA report. So that brings us to, I have 2 public comment cards, and I think I'll just go on and get that out of the way. Chuck Tenen, you're up. And Chuck, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to speak with Kamani Black, who works with me. This year, we've got a 3-day, 2-night camping and fishing trip at Hanson Dam.
And I told him I would be glad to, but your newsletter doesn't give any details of the date.
Well, I'll let you know. I think it's the date, we're going from the 20th of August to the 22nd.
I could help you a lot, and I'm glad to.
And we would definitely want your assistance on, I believe it's Thursday night, the 21st, because we're going to do night fishing.
Not a problem, and I can help them a lot and show them a lot of things. I just needed the details.
Okay, well, you got it.
But he did call me to tell me, so I did get that.
Okay, so Chuck, now you're on your time. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Oh, wait, and it should be over 100 kids this time.
Okay.
Maybe 120.
On the motion sickness tablets?
No, this time we're not going on the boat.
Bigger,
Okay.
bigger and better than last year.
Hanson Dam has like the largest man-made swimming pool, I think, maybe in the country. It also has a man-made lake. So we're going to do that. If anybody gets seasick this time,
No.
then I'm going to quit having these trips.
I'm well versed in that, but this one's going to be bigger and better than the last.
Oh, we're excited about it.
That's right.
Okay,
God,
Chuck.
now what I'm speaking on, I hope you're not mad at me, but good morning, committee members. I had the opportunity to meet with the Vice President of Community Development, Michael Manigault, Bank of America, for 3 hours on the Neighborhoods Fund program. I asked for $50 million for Herb Wesson's district and 50 for Janice Hahn. And he says he knows you, Herb, and he knows Jan Perry very well. He told me that he would not give you $50 million. He would not give you a nickel. But what he would do is give the money to organizations that you support. And he knows most of the council members. He also said to tell you they now have, instead of $750 billion allocated over the next 10 years, but it's now $1.4 trillion to spend for development. And they said that they have plenty of money to help communities in development, but the city does not help them enough to want to give it to them, and that includes the LAHD, the planning, and the council members, because on an application, I said, where's the application? He said, that's the key thing. They don't give the justification. They just don't give the money, but they have it. And they like my ideas, what I presented, and I gave you a copy of something there, and my aggressive passionness to do things. And he's giving the report of our meeting to Ken Lewis, who's aware of me. And he also said that he would help me, Chuck, which doesn't work for the city, to help me in foundation and sponsorship funding to help communities. And they also like TOPA. They were never aware of that. And he says now that he knows me, he'd be glad to help. So they do have plenty of money. It's how you ask for something.
So this is the meeting you had with him. Was it last week?
It was
Because you
yesterday.
did call me about it.
It was
Or you
yesterday.
talked to Andrew.
It was yesterday. He was so
3
glad.
hours, Chuck?
Pardon me?
You met with him for 3 hours?
3 hours. Oh, well, it was pretty close. And you know
Wait
what?
a minute. Was Noel was with you?
He was there.
He stayed in a room with Noel for almost 3 hours?
That man made the mistake and let me talk.
He's a saint.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. But I'll tell you, they do have a lot of money, and they're really in the development and helping this city and the community, and they have lots of money.
Okay.
And he's giving me, I had 2 quick things. I'm going to help you with your fishing trip. And also, I wanted to talk to you at some point about a resolution for the upcoming MPLA act that's going to come into effect. They now say it's going to be $600 million in local economy loss and $60 million in city tax revenue. And I want to thank you and Tony Cardenas for your letter to Wendy Gruhl, because she told me that taking up 2 spots in the hundreds and hundreds of city parking lots, it's going to go into effect in the very near future.
Good man.
Thanks to your letter.
Thank you. Noel Weiss. Good morning.
Good morning, council members. My request is short and sweet here in public comment relative to, again, the question that's kind of still pervading. Mr. Reyes has it on his plum calendar weekly about planning reports, about what's happening with the tenants, tenant situations. It's nice that it's on the agenda. Unfortunately, Gail Goldberg most of the time doesn't show up. And there are a couple of things that have been happening that need to happen, that need to be reported relative to and it's important because I think it's a message by the council to the bureaucracy that we really care about these issues. The prime one, her being, and you had expressed it last year, about the need to equalize the treatment between tenants and conversions and tenants and demolitions. That was, I think, part of when we did the relocation thing. We were going to have follow-up hearings and all that kind of stuff, and basically it ended up kind of falling between the cracks. And I just wanted to put that back, hopefully, at a point where it's in the forefront of your mind, because we really do need to equalize. There's some issues here, for example, relative to the rights of tenants in conversions, where they're not getting adequate, possibly adequate notice of their rights to get paid upon the approval of the tentative tract map. Other things. But the bottom line is that has to be done, and I just want to basically throw that out for your consideration so that we can hopefully close the circle on this. I'm working with the planning department. I've already got standard tenant relocation conditions incorporated into tract map conditions for demolitions. I'm trying to get it done for conversions, but it would help a lot if the policymakers would communicate to the bureaucracy the fact that it's important to them. And that means when we have items on the agenda, the planning department needs to show up, and if they don't show up, then either take it off the agenda or ask them, basically to be responsive to the needs of the citizenry in that regard. Thank you, Herb. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Stay there, though, Noel, because I'm going to, you have a card on item 14, which is the next item, so just stay there.
Sure.
Do you want to respond, Mr.
Yeah,
Reyes?
just one point in fact. I think it's misleading to say that the director of the planning department does not show up to the committee. She does show up when there is something to report. So I just want to put that for the record in defense of the director of the planning department. Thank you.
Okay. You know what, Mr. Reyes? When we were at council Friday, you came over and asked, and I'm having a senior moment, there was a report that we requested in committee, and it didn't come out, Mr. Alacone. Who did we make that request?
I believe it was the housing department. There was a report given that it had to do with the locations of foreclosures or potential foreclosures in each district of the city.
Okay, so when we get Mercedes up here, we'll deal with that issue. Okay, Ms. Barclay, read item 14, and then Noel, you public comment, and Chuck, you're after. No.
Item 14 is a motion, Wesson Reyes, relative to a $30 million line of credit with Fannie Mae for the purpose of acquiring property to preserve existing affordable housing and related actions.
Okay, Noel.
Basically, my comment, short and sweet, is as follows. One, the idea of a line of credit, we were talking about TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, in the context of the fact that housing department seems to say there's no money. Yet, in fact, this is an indication that there is money. The problem, that's the good news. The bad news is this tie-in with this New Generation Fund, I think, is potentially questionable public policy. And again, I would like, only because what you're doing is you're basically skewing scarcity. You're saying, in effect, we are going to draw this money to this particular source as opposed to having the money available on a broader basis. And I don't think I think the potential for corruption, the potential for difficulty, the potential for problems and difficulties when you tie it into a specific Wall Street entity, I think is worthy of serious consideration here in terms of not doing that. But the idea of the line of credit through Fannie Mae as a source of dollars to fund TOPA is a great idea. And I think the money could be there, and then that money basically could be recycled. The handouts that I gave to you, gentlemen, are two. One, Enterprise Fund, which is part of this New Generation Fund, they do work in Washington, D.C., and one of the things that I highlighted, I didn't have time to highlight it on all of them, is that funds were used by Enterprise to fund a TOPA project in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure there's more than one. So, again, I just want to basically reiterate that that concept. And secondly, as far as the power of the committee goes, I think the committee could be doing the public a great service by having the New Generation Fund come in, explain, give the public the documentation to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, again, because the bottom line is, Herb and committee, it's the same old question, who gets what and why, the allocation of resources, what are we doing and why? And I think under these situations, and I gave you the information from the charter, theoretically, you do have the power to investigate, you do have the power to subpoena, you do have the power in theory to swear witnesses if it ever really came down to it, but the bottom line is, we're talking about doing the job of a legislative body, which is essentially investigating the underlying facts as opposed to just passing this stuff through without serious consideration and analysis. And thank you for your listening to me.
Thank you. Since, Mr. President, I've been informed that we have the power to subpoena. My first subpoena I want to have issued to Noel Weiss. Okay, Chuck Tennant, you wanted to speak on item 14.
I just have a brief thing to say about it. Thank you. I had a question there. It says the purpose of acquiring property to preserve existing affordable housing and related actions. Well, does the related actions include economic development and rehab and upgrading? Of course it does. And also, what does that mean, preserve? How do you preserve existing affordable housing? I'd like to know how. But I do know in my meeting with Bank of America, we were bringing up housing, which is a big concern to them, and economic development. And they have a lot of money that they want to spend on helping communities on housing. And one of the things that came up was council members and committees and developers. They really want to encourage developers and give them money to build, to do a lot of different things. And they have plenty of money for developers. And they told me that. They said, that's not a problem. If they have all this money, why is it such a hard deal for this city to approach them if they're willing to do it and they have the money? And they make you think that they have more money than Fannie Mae and they have more money than the city will ever have. But they want to spend it. They want to spend it because they care about communities, they care about youth, they care about housing, they care about helping developers to build things so that people can save existing housing, upgrade it, and build new things. And I'd be willing to help out they left the door open and they said, now we know you, Chuck. And you know what? Ken Lewis, he's the chairman of Bank of America. He says, I'm reporting to him on everything. And we like your ideas. I gave some up there to you, Herb, but on this, I'd still like to know, what does it mean, preserve? How do you preserve existing affordable housing in what goes on in the city with the housing crisis? Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to bring up Mercedes, and I'm sure she'll be able to answer all of your concerns. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, Mr. Reyes wanted me to ask you, how come Mr. Alarcon got the report where it relates to the foreclosures?
I have an answer for you.
He got it from his...
I have an answer, yeah. Exactly. Councilman
They beat us to the punch.
Councilman Cohen got it off of a website that his realtors have found that actually identifies all of these locations throughout the city, and he did it by district. But we had a discussion maybe 3 weeks ago, and we had requested for a map that showed where the foreclosures were. And so
You are about?
So that's where we're at.
You got it. It was actually sent to your office last Friday.
Okay.
I-
Last Friday, that's when we had the Councilman Cohen showing.
Right. But I think what's important for you to know about those maps
Yeah.
is that next week we're going to do an extensive report on foreclosures at this committee. But secondly, at this point, the Housing Department is the only entity that is actually tracking, using all the information available to give you the absolute best picture of what's going on in the city, which means that we take into account, we take out all the duplicates, we have separated them out, both single-family, one set of maps, multifamily, another set of maps. And so I can tell you, for those of you, now a number, who have been on this committee the entire time I've had the privilege to be before you, the Housing Department would not have been in a position to do anything like that in the last 5 years. And now, quarter by quarter, we're mapping, we'll show trend analysis, and have set up a data committee with the Federal Reserve Board, with our local experts and academics, our consultant, and the Housing Department's policy unit, and are producing the mess maps that are available to you. That includes any maps that are done by realtors. Ours are better. And so the ones you received on Friday are up to date. The ones you will receive next week when we come before you will be even better. We've now, by next week, we will have mapped for you all of the foreclosures from 2007 and now the foreclosures for the 2 first quarters of 2008. So you'll have the most up-to-date information, and we're actually beginning to do cuts on it by income level, because what you'll see is that what's going on in one part of the city, even though they'll all have dots, they're not the same story, and our strategies have to reflect what happens on income level. Next week, we'll have a long talk about that, the federal bill, how that all plays. We'll have a long discussion about it. But you'll have everything you need to make the best decisions possible for the city. I'm very happy to be able to say that to you, you wanted an expert housing department, you have one.
All righty. And before you start, I don't know who owns that device that I've heard twice. I don't want to hear it a third time, okay? Now, maybe if you had a different ring, I could tolerate it. Mercedes.
New text page in my stuff.
All right, let's talk. One, thank you, both Mr. West and Mr. Reyes, for having submitted this motion. Thank you for doing that. Preservation of housing. We have nearly 15,000 units that will lose their affordability covenants within the next 5 years. What that means is that they have, most of them, 20-year affordable covenants, mostly running from HUD-type programs. And all of those units at the moment are completely occupied by low-income working people. And when those covenants expire, they turn to the market. So they're available to be sold immediately on the market, having completed all of their obligations to the federal government for the most part. These units, because they are inspected on an annual basis, they're in the best shape for this type of property. It is cheaper in the long run to buy them, put them out to bid to another affordable housing developer, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit, provide what will be minimal rehab dollars because they're in good shape, and add another 55-year affordability covenant on them, keep them in the market. So it is our intention, and you've seen it as you've approved the deals that are coming forward, that we're doing about 50% rehab deals and 50% new construction. And we're working on ways to make our dollars that are become more scarce every year go further. And so it makes sense to do it this way. We've also begun to map these deals around transit, because what we want is for those to be a priority. While there are state dollars available, TOD dollars, all these other Prop 1C dollars, we want to put ourselves in the best possible position to compete and leverage our dollar. So we're targeting those. It doesn't have to be a metro, but along the different lines. So we're looking at all those first. So among the 15,000, those that would first leverage other state dollars while that money is available is the first thing we'll do. I think it's also important for you to know that we don't want to be in the way of the market. If a nonprofit or a for-profit affordable housing developer can come in and purchase those, we want them to do that. But there are times when the owner is ready to leave and there is no developer that is ready to purchase, leaving all of those units vulnerable to a free market economy, and we don't want that to happen. The other thing is that I'm enjoying the repartee this morning because unfortunately what really is happening is that the credit markets have tightened so much is that there's no money available for anybody to borrow. And what we're seeing already is that the $100 million New Generation Fund, it took in New York a full year for the first deal to be consummated out of their fund, right? Here, the Enterprise Foundation alone is currently underwriting the first $40 million in deals right now. I met with them yesterday and they told me they're receiving 5 to 6 calls a week, and there are 4 other servicers to that fund. Because of the tightening of the credit markets, I am certain that we are going to expend the first round of the 100 million very quickly. And so that means that the kind of funding that would be available through this kind of a line of credit is going to be critical, because there isn't enough money in the market right now to do that. So we want to be in the position to understand that. We want to be in a position to take advantage of opportunities. And I also see it in another way. Over time, as we're dealing with these, we're looking at foreclosures as well. You will hear next week that there will be a relationship between the foreclosure crisis and the New Generation Fund. Importantly, one of the things that we're hoping to do, as we're working with the Enterprise Foundation and other cities, is to increase the money that comes into the New Generation Fund to do a new facility, an additional facility that adds on to the New Generation Fund that would be used only for foreclosures, to do the acquisition, as the way to leverage, get the best benefit out of the federal dollars. But what we face is that those dollars that are going to come from the federal government on foreclosures have very specific restrictions, right? They can only be used for certain types of properties. They have to be in the foreclosure process. There are limits on income. There are all kinds of limitations. So none of those dollars can be used for preservation unless they're in foreclosure. Right? They also can't be used for regular trust fund, new construction, or rehab deals. They can only be used for those foreclosures. So what you're going to see from us is a tiering and a layering of what is available so that we can cover everything we have to cover. I think my sense is that in the New Generation Fund, you're watching all of our good partners in the New Generation Fund. We're watching if you read, like I do, the Wall Street Journal every day, right? Whether it's Wachovia, or it was Citi, or it was Merrill Lynch last week, or HSBC this week, all of them, and now Freddie Mac this morning, all of them have posted huge losses. Nonetheless, they took the risk in Los Angeles. But it means that they don't have a lot of credit available, and so that there's going to be more pressure on the New Generation Fund. This situation here with Fannie Mae is very similar. They are also under stress, and yet they're honoring their commitment to us at $30 million, at a very good rate. The opportunity to continue with this kind of financing in the next 2 years, if we miss this opportunity, will be very, very difficult because of what is going on in the markets. As you've said, we have, as you see and you noted in your motion, the Housing Department has $15 million that we could put toward the guarantee. Why we can do that is because the money flows through those accounts. It is not, as others have suggested, money that is there that can be spent on anything else. The money has to flow. It's a pipeline. And that's why we're using those accounts, because we are a lender. So there's constantly money flowing through. So we will expend this year's, the allocation that's in this year, because it will be filled what comes next year. So that's what it is. It's a pipeline of funding that will always be available in case. The other thing we've done is set aside the interest for a full year. If we were to max out the line at $30 million, we have already set aside the full 1 year of interest to cover any cost. So there's no additional cost. You already approved it in our budget. So we have that available. Now what we're facing is where the city would get the last $20 million as a guarantee. Again, you will approve every deal, as you always do with us. They'll come through. You'll see them in transmittals to take a look at what we're doing. But what we face is that these preservation deals are all over the city. And so there is no other mechanism that we have to go and acquire them. There isn't enough money. And so I see this as the last bit of what is a mature financing system for affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles, right? We've come to the point where the trust fund has matured in its process and its openness. It leverages the most that is absolutely possible. Then the New Generation Fund allows us to get a 2-year look at what's going on and understand what our capital needs will be. We couldn't have done that if we didn't work on the trust fund. We couldn't have had the New Generation Fund. The startup and incredible success of the Permanent Supportive Housing Program, we could not have done that if we didn't have all these things. Then we've done an acquisition fund only for permanent supportive housing. This is the last piece of what we need to continue to mature and get our production system to scale. We've never had that, and that is what we absolutely need in the city, and we need this kind of flexibility, always with your oversight and your guidance, but we need these types of facilities. And so I'm grateful that you came forward, and I'm confident that with all of us, we will find the right balance of the funds that are necessary to do the rest of the guarantee.
Okay. Mr. Cardenas.
You started off by reminding us of a staggering number of units that in the next 5 years could fall out of the affordability community. 15,000 units. With the action that we're talking about today on this item, how many units could we potentially preserve roughly with this amount of money?
Well, this is a 5-year facility, right? So our hope is that we would churn it several times, right?
So even at that?
So even at that. In 5 years, I think we can probably, if I'm looking about $100 million, I think we can probably get to about 6,000 of these. And, we'll keep working on we'll keep working with you on how we get to scale. But it's the first time that we'll have any chance at all.
Uh-huh. So you're talking about a $500 million figure, rough estimate. Hopefully we could get to 6,000 units with that of preservation. But I'm just roughing the numbers here, but I don't understand how we get to 6,000 units. How much are we paying per door? I mean, what's the market require of us to preserve these units? Because I'm looking, correct me if I'm wrong, I was looking at some tables recently where people are coming to our housing department and they want to make this commitment, but they're letting us know that they're spending, $400 and some thousand a door?
It will be much cheaper, and you've noticed.
Educate us on, because I understand that when it comes to new units and units that we're trying to preserve, that there's a cost factor difference. Roughly, what is that?
Well, what we end up funding out of the trust fund, we don't fund anything at $400,000, right? We're at about $100,000 or less per unit. And
I'm talking about their cost.
Yeah, their cost. But you've also noticed lately that we're rejecting those deals.
I hope so.
We are. So they're not, people have to, we have to get real here about what the market allows, and there are some deals that just should not be done. And we have said no to them. And so the economies of scale are getting better because they're getting the message that we're not going to fund them. Here, it's about 100,000, it can be about 100,000 per unit, and it'll be some rehab, right, in additional. That'll come from other funds to get it done. But what we also face here is that the market's we're going to face different, these are all across the city. So the market in different areas is different, right? We're in submarkets. So we'll, in the valley, they'll be more expensive because the market is better there than they'll be in South Los Angeles, for instance. Right? So we're going to face all of those different market variables. The other thing is that when we're looking at rehabs in the trust fund, those are usually private deals, and the acquisition cost may be smaller, but the rehab cost is much greater. They need gut rehab. Right? Here, the acquisition price will be higher because they're in better shape. So you're not talking about, knocking the wall down. You may be talking about replacing the kitchen, new bathrooms, that kind of thing, but we're not talking about gut rehab. So what you don't end up paying in acquisition in a trust fund deal, right, you end up paying that in the rehab part. Here, we'll get a better deal overall. But the question is going to be, where are the leveraging sources and how much are we going to have? I'm conservative, Councilman, because I don't, given what's going on in the state as well, I don't know how much we're going to end up having to put in. If they end up being tax credit deals, which I hope they will be, right now, tax credit equity is down. So the government we have to subsidize what the market is not putting in terms of the pricing of tax credits. So we're looking at all these moving variables right now, and that's why I'm conservative about my estimates. We may be able to do more, but it really does depend on all the leveraging, the pricing of all of these things that we cannot control.
Now, when you say you gave an example and you interjected, I hope they're tax credit deals.
No, yes.
Educate us to why we would want to be adjunct or participating in more tax credit deals. Because even as an elected, when I got elected in the first place, I didn't realize that tax credits really aren't government dollars that come out of our coffers. So what's a tax credit, and how does that get leveraged into a transaction in which we have some affordable housing at the end result?
Tax credit, you're right, is actually an IRS program, and it was established in 1986. And it, by population, it distributes a value to each state, and then each state has the ability within limits to set its own program. It is so important, because you're right, it does not come from government coffers, that anywhere from 50 to 65, 70% of a deal can actually be financed with the tax credit equity that is purchased. So for instance, a large corporation buys tax credits to bring down their tax bill, right? But they have obligations. You have reporting for, I think it's 10 years. You have an affordability requirement for the tax credit for 15 years. That is how, in the modern system, it's the only way that we can approach it. So either they're going to be tax credits so that the equity comes from that to handle a lot of the acquisition and the rehab when we get paid back, or there'll be bond deals. And some of that is possible on these as well. There'll be bond deals where the equity also comes from bonds, not from us.
Okay, so you gave two examples of two elements of funding that developers can or hopefully look toward utilizing that do not require a trust fund of our own to contribute. Obviously, they tend to leverage our trust funds or what have you.
We do contribute because we're the gap lender. If we do not contribute, they will not compete.
Exactly.
Right.
But at the same time, you gave two examples where you got tax credits and bonds. Those funds ultimately do not come out of a fund that is controlled or that we administer in the city of Los Angeles, correct?
Correct. That is what we leverage. With our dollars, we leverage those dollars from the state.
So what we could hope or should hope is that we're being approached by developers who maximize those elements before they come to us and ask us for our $35 million that we have set aside for this or $100 million set aside for
Well, the way the system works is that the way the system works in the state for competition is that they come to us first, we make our commitment, and then they go. They cannot go to the state without the commitment. I think, though, it's also important to note that there's not enough tax credit in the state, in the entire state of California, to meet the need of Los Angeles. Not even close. In the entire state, there's not. Even if we had a trust fund of, $500 million, there isn't enough state tax credit to leverage it.
And how about bonds?
There are more bonds, but even that the cap would run on that as well.
So both of those elements are capped?
Yes.
Outside of our jurisdiction?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Reyes.
I appreciate the questions of my colleague, Councilman Cardenas. With all the answers you have given him, I was wondering and trying to understand how we make statements to our constituents about our response as a city to the foreclosures and to the housing crisis, and what are we doing when we are speaking to Joe Citizen and say, this is what the city can do. Now, I can't get into tax credit and CIDLAC and leveraging with Joe Citizen. It just doesn't happen. So in the most basic terms, when I go to my community meeting and I have a room full of very anxious people and I have folks who are actually already being pushed out of their homes, or folks have already lost their homes and they're living with relatives and you've got that agony going on, what do I say to them? What I have been thinking about is that we are working on programs, we're leveraging our monies, and say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I get a home or don't I? And I can't answer them. And I tell them that, we are at a place where the city has no money, the state is taking our money, and the federal government hasn't even shown its face as to how it's dealing with this crisis. Until we get a new president, even then we don't know if we'll have the money. Because I'm being told in D.C. that we're not going to see anything probably 2 years after even a new president gets elected, should it be a president that wants to care about the urban center. And so what do we say to them? I mean, you've given some very good responses, but I want to be able to say something that says we're responding.
As it relates to foreclosures, the federal government and the president signed a bill, I guess now 10 days ago, that will distribute nearly $4 billion to communities to deal solely with stabilized neighborhoods. There are restrictions on those dollars. For instance, there is a formula that has not yet been developed. It's a formula. HUD has been given 60 days to work on the formula. The Housing Department, is active already on that formula, what it needs to be. We're working with the Mayor's office so that we send the right message on that. We're working with Enterprise to make sure that the needs of Los Angeles are taken into account in the formula and how the money is distributed. It is likely that the money will go from the federal government to the state, and that locally we will do an application for those dollars. Now, all of those dollars are housing dollars. They can't be used for anything else but housing, and only on foreclosures, right? Within that, you have some set-asides. 25% of the dollars will have to be used for families that are at 50% or below of median income. It is very likely that for those families, what we'll see is a rental product because they can't afford a home. And that is permitted. We had a long talk with Congresswoman Waters. She was very open and helped us as we went through to shape those requirements so that it fit the city of Los Angeles. So she was very generous with her time. I sat down with her a long time. Councilman Garcetti's staff and others, Wendy Gruhl also was there, had a long talk with her on our behalf, and we got a lot of things that help us out and give us options. Then there will be a cap up to 120% of AMI, right? With that, what's probably going to happen, what we're probably going to come to you with, is a proposal to leverage our dollars with foundation dollars that are now being talked about nationally to come in to leverage more capital for acquisition. The one thing we don't want to do is use the dollars that come from the federal government to actually do the acquisition. We don't want to do that. We want to leverage that dollar with others so that we get something like the New Generation Fund to get dollars, raise that capital just for acquisition and then churn it. So what I guess I would say to your constituents is within, I would say, 6 weeks, there will be before the City Council a proposal on the legal entity and financing structure that would come forward and acquire properties, hold them, work on rehabbing them, and redistributing them in the community. One of the things that is going on is a negotiation with very large lenders on what the actual pricing should be, and our department is working with Enterprise neighborhood by neighborhood to determine what a true value is and then what a discount is. So there's actually real help on the way.
So is there value, or I'm trying to find a way to phrase this, for folks to be prepared for that, I guess it's an application or some type, how do we identify the folks who have the criteria to qualify for these funds? I mean, should they start getting their paperwork? What do we tell them? Get your paperwork ready, is there a way to start, at least in a very general sense, get them prepared?
The best thing they could do for those that would qualify is to start doing home buyer counseling. They should immediately start doing that to get prepared. They will hear not only from the Housing Department, they will hear from the Redevelopment Agency and hopefully from the Housing Authority as well, as we work together in a large entity that would distribute in the way that makes the most sense for the mission and the projects that all three agencies have.
So the folks who have been foreclosed upon, are those the folks who are just off the playing field, or do they regroup?
Yes, they're going to have, their credit is ruined.
Exactly. So they're gone.
It is going to be, nobody's going to give them a loan at the moment. It's going to be very, very difficult because so many of them, one, in the subprime market, so many of them should have never bought in the first place. They weren't ready, right? So they were the first victims. Now, those that have more income, what they've done is that they bought at the height of the market when nobody should have bought. And now their houses have dropped in value significantly. So they're underwater on their loans. They cannot actually afford the resets because they cannot refinance because the value of the house does not support the loan that they would have to refinance.
And that's the harsh reality we have to share with them.
The harsh reality. And that is, there are very few, as we meet with servicers and with community groups that we have funded and that you all have funded to speak with folks, we're finding that maybe 1 in 20 that come forward is someone that can actually be helped and their loans can be redone. 1 in 20. So that's, we have to understand that our market blew up and that now values are dropping and it is becoming more affordable in the city of Los Angeles. So when we were at, 10% of people could afford, we're actually at the housing department gauging it very carefully, right, what the values have dropped. And now, let me give you an example. Last year, in 2007, the median priced home was somewhere in the area of $550,000 in the city of Los Angeles. A family of 4 had to have an area median income of 198% to afford that home. 198% of median income. Okay. Today, that same median priced home, that same house, which is probably somewhere in the valley, is about $422,000 at the moment and dropping. Okay, and dropping, and at the moment, that same family of 4 has to be at 142% of AMI to afford that home. So we're watching the affordability gap on home ownership close. It's wreaking havoc on poor folks and working poor in terms of rentals. That's it. So you have to have a different strategy for them, right? This is not a one-size-fits-all at all, and that's why we're cutting by income, because the strategies have to match the money and the incomes, all these kinds of things. So we're looking at the menu. The housing prices, it is expected, and the trends show this to be true, are probably going to drop another 15% within the year. So that means we may drop now to the median priced home being affordable to somebody at 130% of AMI, right? Still in the valley, starts to hit South LA, okay, but still in the valley. What we want to make sure we're doing is not getting in the way of that market. I do not want to get in the way of the price getting down to where it needs to be, right? Because those homes in the valley largely are going to be repurchased by new middle-class families because there's a wider spread of people who can afford them. That's what's going on. We want that to happen. We want Los Angeles to normalize. What we've had for the last 3 years has not been healthy for our city, and we want it to drop. It is dropping, and others will come in. As they reach below, what the dollars from the federal government will do is help those that will, no matter how much it drops, are still below what's available to be purchased. That's who we have to focus in on. So we have to distinguish between those that the market will not need a subsidy and those who will always need a subsidy. And that's our goal at the Housing Department, is to give you the information that allows us to make policy decisions on a citywide basis that is based on that takes into account with the redevelopment agent, with HACLA, right? And the mayor's office is completely involved in leading this effort, with the Enterprise Foundation, on working out for the first time what would truly be a citywide, right, housing strategy in a crisis. And that is what all of these different funds that we're talking about do. I had promised you all when I came that the Housing Department would become a public sector entrepreneur. And this is what that is. It's understanding how the markets actually work, not being reactive to the market, but actually being a partner in the market. And the New Generation Fund is the first real partnership where we're standing, the city, private development, and philanthropy, shoulder to shoulder as we get this stuff done. And that's what this is as well. And so it's that way that we have to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. for the hard
My
work.
understanding that the president has to leave shortly, so I will let him.
Thank you.
make
Just
that
a
statement.
quick direction. Pleased to see this moving forward, and congratulations on looking at this and the Enterprise Fund as well, moving forward. If I could have, I think you represent this, and I think that there's a few moving pieces happening at once. My understanding is HACLA is negotiating also a line of credit. CRA has been doing that as well. Can the CLA kind of give us a report together on that stuff so we know how we can best leverage all of those pieces together? I know in the motion there's 3 suggestions. 2 of them would be redevelopment type of money. Another one was Section 108, which I'm not sure if can we leverage can we get a line of credit based on a line of credit? Is that
actually comes not from us.
Okay. Well, to look at that and what other options we have, and making sure that we also want to make this easy for both policymakers and developers who would be doing this, so there's kind of one point of contact, be that the housing department, be that, another agency, whatever it is. But I think we want to make sure that that's done in conjunction as much as possible. So we'll rely on you to kind of help bring the parties together on that. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Garcetti.
and one last thing on that, with the CRA stuff too, those sources of money, I know we just got an update. Things are looking better at the state level in terms of the take from property tax. That's kind of moving off the table a little bit. But the CRA monies looks almost definite, and that's an $8 to $9 million hit for us permanently, not just a one-time take. And so how that affects, the sources that are outlined in here would be important. Thanks.
Okay. Now, we've been joined by our colleague, Richard Alarcon. I believe, Councilman, you wanted to make a statement, or please come forward. If you'd like, you could sit in Mr. Garcetti's chair.
Right.
Keep it warm.
Yeah. I don't have a vote here. Actually, I just wanted to participate in the discussion because I think it's been a very fruitful discussion, and I don't think anybody is surprised to know that I've been completely frustrated at our lack of activism on this issue of foreclosure for the last year and a half. I also want to concur with a lot of what Mercedes is saying in terms of the general economic picture. But I want to ask the chair, Ed Reyes, and Jan Perry in particular, to recall the earthquake. You were all, I believe, chiefs of staffs when the earthquake hit in '94, and the tone that we set in the aftermath of that was, I think, a model that we need to reemploy during this time. So if we look at the strategies that were successful, there were both short and long-term strategies that were successful. There were some models that were not successful, but I think educational, that we can reemploy with caution and with a better view. So specifically, let me mention a couple of things that we just haven't taken advantage of. We have $275 million in borrowing capacity in Section 108. I mean, it's a formulaic thing. We get it from the amount that we're eligible in Community Development Block Grant, but we're not utilizing that whatsoever. It's just sitting there, and it's frustrating to see so many people, 606 in Sylmar, I mean in my district, just since April, who have lost their homes, and it just continues. I think, so part of the answer, I agree with Mercedes that what we have to do is have a massive, holistic strategy that looks at every opportunity. One opportunity that I have not heard discussed here is disaster assistance. I think it's time that we view this foreclosure crisis as a disaster. I heard Mercedes mention the word disaster, and that's exactly how we need to approach this. The recovery for the earthquake in '94 largely hinged on a long-term strategy that involves CRA. In those communities that employed that strategy are finding tremendous opportunities. The Price-Pister plant, Pacoima Plaza plan that you just approved today is a result of the disaster assistance program that was established in '95. It was a CRA recovery program. So that's a strategy that I think we need to start talking about. I think we need to work with our state legislators and governor to figure out whether we can declare a disaster in the state of California relative to the foreclosure crisis in the United States, and therefore trigger certain mechanisms that we do not now have access to, specifically the disaster assistance program for CRA, the employment of CRA in response to a disaster. Secondly, it concerns me that what is coming down from the feds might force us to look at rental when the one market that isn't going down is rental. In other words, we're taking people out of home position where they were paying $4,000 a month for an average size house. Now we may see them, and we are seeing them, move into rental positions where they're paying $1,500 to $2,000 a month. And we're seeing the price of housing dip to as low as $160,000 in Sylmar for a small two-bedroom, probably a funky two-bedroom, but nevertheless, $160,000 was unheard of just 6 months ago. And that house, if you put it on a regular fixed-rate loan, would be less than $2,000 a month. So as we receive the federal money, as we put together the infrastructure to try to take advantage of that money, we have to be careful that on the one hand, I agree that we want the market to correct itself in terms of pricing. The market can overcorrect itself in terms of pricing. In other words, what was overpriced, for example, the new construction in the northeast San Fernando Valley, I have something like 700 brand new houses that aren't selling. The price that was intended and all the investors put their money up for was $525,000 to sometimes $600,000. The price that you can get now is in the low 400s and sometimes even below that. But the question is, will that overcorrect? Is the correct price $250,000? Well, I think some of those houses are going to sell for $250,000, but I don't think that's the correct price for that house that was brand new. So, I just wanted to share in this discussion. I think we have to be activists in this effort. We cannot hope that the market correct itself. It is not going to correct itself. Ben Bernanke, the Federal Reserve Chairman, President Bush, a lot of folks that are extremely conservative on declarations of market interference, all agree that this market is not going to correct itself. At the same time, we have to develop an infrastructure that allows us to be cautious as we move forward at the same time aggressively, because people are losing their homes. They're not just losing their homes; they're losing any semblance of the middle class lifestyle they had obtained. We have to develop short-term strategies for what I would call gap problems, and that is, for example, those people who have experienced short-term unemployment, but because of they're at the fourth and fifth year of their adjustable rate mortgage, they can't even take a short-term job loss, and so they lose their house. So a 2-month unemployment puts them in a reverse position, and it just accelerates even when they do get their job back. However, if you could provide a short-term gap loan of as little as $10,000 to $25,000 to cover the 2 months that they lost, and once they get their job back, you may be able to save their home ownership position. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for marshaling this stuff through. I wanted to put it in the context of the earthquake. A lot of those strategies are just kicking in now. And we should develop an infrastructure for the federal program, explore all possibilities with our debt position, particularly the Section 108, and leveraging our CDBG monies. Explore the feasibility of not just the existing CRA programs, but what new CRA programs we might create relative to the blighted areas that will occur or are already occurring in areas of dense vacancies resulting from the foreclosure crisis. Many communities in the aftermath of the earthquake, you will remember, chose not to use CRA as a strategy. And I think we have seen further deterioration in some of those areas as opposed to options for improvement. So those, I just wanted to say that we are far from solving this crisis. In fact, I would say we're in the middle of this crisis, and 3 years, and I'm saying that this crisis began 3 to 5 years ago, and I believe that we have 3 to 5 years before we see the light of day. And it's all going to hinge on how aggressive we are willing to pursue this problem. But it's going to rely on a multiplicity of strategies, and I think that to ask one person, any general manager, any expert, to come up with a perfect formula is overreaching. We're going to have to talk to a lot of different people, and a lot of them are going to have to come together to come up with a lot of different kinds of approaches, and frankly, some of those will probably fail. But the inaction will create have a more dismal effect than to make a mistake. We have to be willing to bear some risk here, and I think that some of the strategies that have emerged recently, particularly in light of the federal act, and obviously the first thing we have to do is position ourselves to receive that money. But that doesn't, whatever happens with that money, that doesn't mean that we can't take other funds that are more flexible and devise our own mechanisms to solve these problems. So one that I introduced, for example, you just passed today in committee. I'll speak on that issue to make it appropriate, but to adjust our poverty guidelines might create eligibility streams for folks who are now ineligible, and expand the access to solving this problem. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. But I want to thank you for having this discussion, and I hope all of us will be able to pitch in with our own individual ideas. Bottom line is we have to re-stimulate a market that is in dire straits. And I mean, I don't know how you're going to. The tax credit program is a great model, but when the prices are going down, why would anybody want to invest in a housing project? And that's why many of those projects are going belly up. So it's we have to figure that out. And you, as the chair, are in the key strategic position. And I want to thank you also for expediting measures through that may have instant stimulative effect, and I really believe that our housing department, with our community development department, in terms of their responsibilities for CDBG and Section 108, and our CRA programs, are in front position to solve these problems. We saw a lot of problems emerge in the aftermath of the earthquake. The vacancy rate created blighted communities. People are stealing copper on a regular basis. They're going to go in and steal the plasterboard off the walls very shortly if we don't get a handle of this crisis. And so I just want to thank you for allowing me to express some of my frustration. And
well, you
thank you again.
Are welcome to visit with us anytime. What I want to do is, we need to move this item, but I think, Mr. Reyes, I'll let you ask the last question, and then we move forward.
Well, before Councilman Alarcon leaves, Councilman, I just wanted to say I appreciated your insight, and there was a lot that happened back then that I think we can learn from. But I think one of the fundamental challenges we have as a city, and it's a very basic question, is that we have to ask our communities, where will the housing go? Today we can move these potential opportunities for housing, but when the very same neighborhoods tell you we don't need more housing, we're already too dense, the council members who are not here today, we need to be able to stimulate, because if you look at the parts of the area we represent, it tends to be the areas where we already do have a fair share, if not a large share, of where the housing goes. But if we're going to be holistic and looking at the answer, we have to start with a fundamental, I believe, question is, where will the housing go? And actually ask the council, but more importantly, the neighborhood councils and the homeowner associations and the folks who would fight where the development of housing. I mean, we need to ask, where will the housing go? And no one wants to answer that question. And I think that's something that we all need to somehow find another way of asking, and perhaps providing destinations so we can create this relief that we are from the pressure that we are feeling. So I want to throw that in because I think that's part of the equation of how we create some solution to this crisis.
Makes sense. Mr. Cardenas?
Never mind.
Okay. So, Mr. Alarcon, you can go. I thought that Mr. Cardenas was going to direct something. Okay, with that said, without objection, let's move that. We'll adopt the motion. Ms. Barclay, is there anything else before this committee?
No, sir.
This committee's adjourned. Thanks.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.